The Inspire Us Podcast.
This is my friend Laura.
How you doing, Fabrice? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, can you repeat your name because they told
Dara.
me recording in progress when your name was pronounced.
Okay. Dara.
Dora, D-O-R-A? No,
Dara. D-A-R-A.
Dara.
Yes, there we go.
The English
Dara.
accent. So maybe we can jump right into it. I wanted to speak to you first about your book that you just released, which has a very interesting concept where you met with a gardener. And as an academic who studies entrepreneurship and management, you found there were many links and things related to gardening and the way nature grows and the way entrepreneurship or the way we manage a certain enterprise. Can you tell us more? What was the story about that book and what are some of the things you found?
Thank you. Interestingly, that book is very related to my previous book, so I probably will talk about that one too. But basically, in the previous book, I was talking about France, how it's a great entrepreneurship ecosystem. And to convince people about that, I had developed a lot of metaphor about saying, you complain about France because you're worried that there are unions or maybe there are civil servants, blah, blah. But, an ecosystem is a bit like a jungle. It's always like a jungle. And if you want to make money, it's not going to be easy. If you believe that you can go in the jungle and it's going to be a walk in the wood, you're underestimating the true nature of the journey. And therefore, I was trying by that metaphoric work to say, listen, if you're a true entrepreneur, there are going to be some snakes, there are going to be some spiders, etc. It happens that in France, it's maybe the tax administration, URSSAF, or maybe the union, whatever. But overall, you are underestimating that in every ecosystem, you got such painful stuff. For instance, you go to the US, it would be the lawyers. The lawyers are a fucking pain in the ass. They really can ruin your life. So trying to say, oh, gee, I suffer in France, it's underestimating that you suffer a lot in New York, suffer a lot in London. And if you try to do entrepreneurship in Moscow or in Sao Paulo or in Jakarta, it's worse. It's worse. Okay, so that was the argument in that book. And one of the other message at that time of the debate was that people said, well, I wish it would be simple in France, I could do things easily. There will be a lot of money. I've got a great idea. You inject money and then I make money. And I was like, no way. No way it's going to be like that. This is so naive. This is not startup, okay? Startup is not having a great idea with your big smile and you being young and some crazy angel giving you cash that they're giving you because they have a tax break because they invest into a young firm. This is nonsense, okay? Therefore, when I met the gardener, that gardener, I met the guy, it was kind of a collective groups and he was there in that collective where we were trying to go back to nature, blah, blah. I asked, okay, what do you do? And he said, well, I spend my year trying to convince people that a garden is not a stupid flat space that you inject water and you inject fertilizer and that's it. You got agriculture. Nature is much more complex than that, much more difficult than that. And you cannot get away with the difficulty by just injecting water and injecting fertilizer. Not to say that people didn't do that or people didn't want to do it. Yeah, sure, a lot of people have done a lot of production, agricultural production by, let's go big, flat, let's cut the forest and let's replace it with a GMO soil with a lot of artificial watering and artificial fertilizer. But we are smarter nowadays that we know that if you go to the Amazon forest and you cut the forest and you put the fertilizer and water, this is not good, okay? Listen, this is not good. Not to say that no one is doing money on the short term, but overall it's stupid. So the guy tells me that story, says, I try to convince people not doing that. And immediately I told him, I said, it's funny because you are doing the same work that I'm doing, which is you're trying to convince people that they should have a relationship to nature and to agriculture and to production in that area, which is exactly the same problem I have into more social and economic ecosystem, where I tell people, listen, it is not going to be easy like, oh, it should be clean and organized and no problem and easy. I can be a god on my little plot and there should be any pest. And then I'm going to put water, which is fundraising, and that's it. I'll become rich. So I told him, you got the same message as I've got. And what is going on here is that in both systems, whether it's the relationship we have with nature or the relationship that we have with a social ecosystem, humans are underestimating the true complexity of mechanism, and also humans wish, especially when they are inexperienced, that it would be easy and I could easily produce and get rich. And so we decided that we would write about that we would try to describe, using the metaphor of the garden, that many stuff that we start to be a bit more sensitive, because many people are sensitive nowadays to the argument that maybe you don't want to cut the forest to get a magic OGM soil out of the ground. Maybe that's not too smart. Leveraging that caution to bring it to other social and economical situations so people become a bit more smart. Say, maybe I should not aspire to have a full control with my own injection of input. Maybe I should appreciate that the process are a bit more complex. And that's the story of the book, or the initial of the book.
It's interesting that you have this comparison, because you point to that it's a mindset problem. Everyone says the business, in Europe and France is complicated, but you say, hey, look, in America, the lawyers, it's just different problems. So it seems that really it's a mindset issue. So what's wrong with the French entrepreneurial mindset?
Okay. So it's interesting because now we are navigating between the two books. In the second book, the one we started with about the garden, the title is about, the subtitle is about reflecting on French, Réflexions sur notre rapport au vivant. It hints at the French expression rapport au monde, which means worldview, a bit what you try to capture with your term mindset. So here we've been trying to abstract by doing the comparison between the garden and the social world to what is our mindset at a bit of abstract level, where we can make an equivalence between the two mindsets. Okay, now let's address it to the specificity of what you say for entrepreneurship, and that's something which was addressed in my first book. Yeah, there is an idea that the French ecosystem would be bad. That idea is based on two premises. It's that entrepreneurship should be simple, based on an idea, just like, oh, I got a concept, and oh, someone will give me cash, and then I execute and I'm rich. So that's one part of the reasoning. And the second part of the reasoning is, oh, France doesn't have the right thing for entrepreneurship. So France would have too many civil servants. France would have too much tax. France would have, not enough cash funding VC for money. So it's a joint of those two things, okay? Those two things are wrong, okay? The first thing, in my first book, I start the book explaining when you study entrepreneurship properly, it is not true that entrepreneurship is having a concept and get fundraising. This is nonsense. Nonsense. Okay? Most entrepreneurs do not function this way. I know it's counterintuitive because in most business school, we do teach by the process where we suggest you to have ideas. So we got things like ideation mechanisms, and then we prepare a business plan, and But it's not because we and I know about that because I'm a professor in business school, so I know what we do. But it's not because we are used to teach it this way that it reflects the reality of entrepreneurship. So there is a big misunderstanding, and maybe we'll come back to the sub-element of that misunderstanding. But mostly to tell you just one word, to tell you what we think is true. Modern theories about entrepreneurship especially, let's say, the last 20 years, say that the word we use is called effectuation. It sounds a new word. That entrepreneurs are people that are good at having effect. That's why we say effectuation. And this is based on scientific studies on true entrepreneurs, where we discover that entrepreneurs work with their ecosystem. They know people, people know them, they know what they are doing, they are actors, and they keep on acting, which is mostly having a job or doing something else. And because they are in that process, then opportunity emerge, which is very different from the conception from business school, where anyone can get any crazy idea, and then anyone can enter into any industry. The more incompetent you are, the more you'll say, I'm disrupting, which is, I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. So you wrap yourself under I'm a disruptor, which is, I come to the industry, I say, you morons, why didn't you do that? Which no one wanted to do. Those guys had a good reason not to do it, okay? Because they know better. And you're like, oh, why don't we do that? Because in my business school, I did slides and I won the competition, which most of the case is nonsense. My experience as a business school professor is that we do teach stuff in business school which are useful. And having people going through that process, get them to enter some industry, get them to start acting, whether or not those business plan actually work, especially the first generation business plan, I really believe the answer is simply no, doesn't work. But at least we got our students to start acting in that industry. And after being an actor in the industry, then probably if they keep on doing it, they end up being what we call effectuation. And then something happened to them. Does it have a relationship to their first great idea in business school? Most of the time, no.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the first part, the conception we got about entrepreneurship in general, nothing specific to France. I mean, effectuation theory emerged in the US at Carnegie Mellon. I mean, it's an international approach to entrepreneurship that is becoming dominant in modern teaching of entrepreneurship. So usually I would recommend to anyone, if you were not taught about effectuation in an entrepreneurship class, probably you need to complete your education by learning about the effectuation. I'm serious. Okay, not to say that whatever you've been learning is bad, but you need to complete that. Make sure you at least get a good exposure to that theory. Otherwise, probably you're really missing the modern understanding of what's going on. Okay, so first part, how do we understand entrepreneurship? Second, what do we believe about friends, which also could be wrong. And so the book spends a lot of time to explain. It explains the positive things about friends, but also spends time to say, you believe that tax is a problem, you believe that administration is a problem, you believe regulation is a problem. And let me explain to you that it's usually not a problem, or it could even be an advantage. So the usual critiques about friends are usually rather weak. Very weak.
Say about the regulation, because that's the big one, and especially Americans criticize the European Union for imposing a lot of regulations. People see them as restrictions. People point to, for example, hiring international to get visas, work visas, or even people point to certain climate restrictions, certain things have to be adhered to. How do you respond to those critics?
Thank you about your question. First, you have to be aware that some people that tell you that we should be absolutely free and that those European countries are against freedom, I really appreciate that you ask me about international hiring, because those who would see this video in 20 years may not remember, but last week, the US administration has been imposing crazy regulation on hiring. So give us a break, okay? Okay? So like newbie libertarian, give us a break. Be consistent. Don't smoke your weed. Okay? The idea that only France would restrict international hiring is nonsense. Trump, read my lips, does restrict international hiring. So this is my position, okay? there is a lot of crap going on about, oh, the US are like this, Europe is like that. Notice, this is so incredible. Nowadays, people are going to come to Europe because the US easily will regulate. Let me just tell you an example which I put in my book. People would say, I was using your example, okay? I enjoy that. You're literally putting it on a plate to me, okay? But let me give you another example. People would say, yeah, Europe, crazy unions and crazy regulation that prevents freedom of making money. Yeah, supposedly. When I was in the US, because I did live in the US, I was a young engineer and we had to do a conference in New York. And I wanted to plug my machine. I was in a conference hall in New York. Someone comes to me and says, Fabrice, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm going to plug the machine. And it's really like the plug, it's on the ground, okay? So the outlet is here, okay? It's 1 meter away. I say, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm going to plug it. I say, don't do it. I'm like, why not? Well, because in New York, you're not allowed to plug anything unless the electrician from the union are there. I'm like, what do you mean? I thought, because that's what kids in business school believe, that only Europe has got unions. Did someone lie to me? Did someone lie to me? Because I thought that only Europe has that. This is my answer. Think, are people lying to you when they tell you that only Europe has crazy regulation? Because we don't have such regulation in France. Do you know where Airbnb was forbidden? Germany. Do you know where Uber was forbidden? London. Was Airbnb and Uber forbidden in France? Never. You believe we are regulated, which is okay because they want you to believe it. I can tell you, we'll come to that question, if it's not that bad, okay, why do we believe it? Okay, but I want you to understand that, whoa, okay, so maybe our assumption about basic assumptions are just wrong. Then we'll have to figure out why they're wrong. So in the book, I go on and on about those counterexamples. And another argument, which would be, there's also an assumption that when we have regulation, they have to be bad, which is a naive libertarian point of view. Okay, regulation are bad. We would be well off without regulation. This is an assumption. So, for instance, the Chinese have had problems a few years ago in their food industry because, it was a free market and a bit of a jungle. And so some guys were putting some chemicals, which were white, to imitate milk. So their children were drinking chemicals instead of milk, and they died. Okay? Now, question.
They're all Chinese weird stuff with honey as well, I think.
Exactly. Okay. So, now, question. When the Chinese had a problem with their food industry, where do you think did they go to try to get something that would work?
Let's say
France. No, France. France. Why? Because we got a very strong agricultural system that is extremely productive. Indeed, some people would accuse, especially my co-author of my second book, say, too productivist. But it's difficult to believe because people would tend to say, oh, France is a bad lefty country. Well, no. They are very productive. It's much more than we would believe, okay? And that productivity is based on the fact that you can trust what you produce. And how do you go make trust? You can have regulation. Yeah. And who is the best
regulation
in untrusting and is to untrust what you're doing? It's what we call regulation. Mm-hmm. So you got a ministry. It's not a private entity that is here to defend the collectivity and to say, we want to be sure that what we produce is not bad. Yes, we call it regulation, but does it have to be assumed to be bad? This is an assumption that we need to start reflecting on if we have a brain. So do not assume that A, regulation are bad in absolute sense. B, do not assume that France has more regulation than the US. In many cases, they have at least way more. And if they are not pure regulation, let me give you another argument about regulation. In France, for instance, typical argument, people would say, listen, we can't work because there is a lot of labor market regulation. So it's a tip in the French, one of you two is French, I mean, that has French cultures that knows the argument. They would say, yeah, in France, the labor code is thick like that. So literally people would use that graphic image. The labor code is thick like that. So it's a classic image of the French system, which interpreted from the outside would be the proof that probably you can't work in France because it's too complex. Okay, why not? True enough, the labor code called Code du Travail is thick. Okay, now if you think about it, this is completely misleading. The reason is the following. And this is coming from an argument that I found into the World Bank ranking of countries for entrepreneurship. It's called Doing Business. So it's a ranking organized by the World Bank where they try to figure out which country is good in the world. Okay, France was. Now I worked on it 10 years ago, so I'm starting to lose some of the numbers, but was very highly ranked in that ranking. You got 170 countries in the world. I don't want to say anything stupid, but I think France was 15 or 20, which is highly ranked. Okay, especially if you consider that in that ranking of doing business, many other countries were small countries. Therefore, in a small country, like let's say Singapore, it's easy to re-engineer the country. Why? Because Singapore is big like a large firm. So you can re-engineer it like that. Go and re-engineer US, Russia, France, Germany. You don't re-engineer such large system like that. You can do it for Singapore, but not for France or Russia or the US. Therefore, in that ranking, especially in that ranking, they had dimension. For the administrative dimension, France was amazingly well ranked, which is completely counterintuitive. And it was amazing ranked because many of the countries above were mostly small countries. Germany was 80 in that ranking. Okay, so what is going on? The US were behind France. The World Bank had that reasoning. They said, listen, when you start a firm, you have to count all your administrative moves that you got to do to get your firm running. So in some countries, like let's say Singapore, you can actually start a firm in 10 minutes. Okay, so 10 minutes. Let's assume that's the number. In France, it's a bit more complex. It lasts between 1-2 days to a week or two. Okay, so that's longer. And then you have to pay attention to, okay, the books. Supposedly the books are there. Okay, so why not that in some Anglo-Saxon country it's faster, maybe the US could be slightly faster. But what the World Bank did, which is really genius, they said, okay, so that's one part of the story, but another part is that all the admin is not only the books, is all the problems you could have. So for instance, labor market. So you have to pay attention to the books, okay, especially in France. But in the US, there is not much books. Why? Because you do what you want, but then you're going to be sued later. Therefore, what you got to do is when you do anything in New York, you have to go to a lawyer. And the lawyer costs a lot of money. And they say, okay, now we're going to count and we're going to do plus. How much you got to do for the administration plus how much you got to do with the lawyers. Once you do the plus, France is way easier. Why? Because we don't have to do lawyers. You start your firm, you're done. Now, let me tell you another argument. Okay, you don't have to do lawyers much. You can just do it. I mean, sure, there are books and you better know a bit about them. And yeah, it's a bit complex. Maybe in some cases, lawyers will help you, but lawyers are cheap. Second, what is your legal risk? In France, everything in the books, you're supposed to respect it. Sure, you could get sued, but okay, it's not the same business, okay? Or about in New York, it's a full business. You're going to get sued for millions. So if you start counting the actual risk you're taking when you launch a firm, where do you want to launch a firm? In Paris.
Do you feel like ever since Brexit, something has changed?
And let me be very clear. I want you to understand, I'm talking to young people all the time. I am serious for my own kids or for the kids of my friend. I am not kidding. I really think you're safer by launching a firm in Paris or launching a firm in New York. I am serious. I'm really caring for those young people and maybe people watching your podcast. If they believe they are safer in New York, they really should order a brain.
Well, because
this is dangerous business. This is dangerous business in New York.
Well, I'm not sure how much you know about the UK, but the narrative here, or I think what most people understand, is that the environment here is not conducive to successful entrepreneurship because we have the highest electricity costs in Europe. We are quite averse to risk. And I think what's been happening is a lot of UK startups, they tend to flock to America to sort of capitalize on American VC funding. So the argument here in the UK is that this environment is just not conducive to any entrepreneurship and that we need to completely restructure the system. And to use your analogy, it feels like the garden is just unable to be controlled. This garden cannot produce anything fruitful. So I just wondered what you thought about what's going on here.
I've been confronted to those debates for my whole academic life, at least. And I was curious about them before when I was a practitioner. Okay. There is a lot of wisdom in that perception, okay? Now there's a big but. You sense it, okay? There's a big but. Okay, let me go to the but directly. And we can come back to whatever was true, and there was a lot of true stuff. I work in Silicon Valley myself at the beginning of my career, so I know very well that environment, and I know all the crazy, interesting stuff that is going on there. That only occurs there, and unfortunately does not occur in other parts, okay? I'm very aware of that. Now let's backtrack. If an ET, an extraterrestrial entity, were to arrive on planet Earth from the rest of the galaxy, and they were to try to pick randomly an entrepreneur on planet Earth, what do you think would be, because they're picking, therefore they would choose the average entrepreneur, what do you think is the shape of the average entrepreneur on planet Earth? What I mean by shape is, what are the demographic characteristics of the average entrepreneur on planet Earth? Age, gender, ethnicity, industry. What do you think is the average entrepreneur doing?
My first thought is very average. I just think.
Yeah, but let me put the other more easier question to answer. What is a classic entrepreneur we think of in your question? What was a classic entrepreneur? It was we're looking at Mark Zuckerberg, okay? White guy or maybe Indian guy in Silicon Valley doing IT. That was your reference entrepreneur.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. Now let me give you the answer for the ET. The ET would not find a white guy working in IT. The ET would find a dark-skinned woman working in the suburbs of a big town in a country of the South, of the global South. This is the average entrepreneur. The average entrepreneur is a mother in the suburbs of Lagos or Dakar or São Paulo, feeding her family by having a little food business. I want you to be aware of that. Okay? I want you to start calibrating and also the representation about what are we talking about. If we believe we all should be Mark Zuckerberg, it's a completely different story from, I'm talking about entrepreneurship. What do you mean about entrepreneurship? Now, I'm not saying thinking about Mark is bad. I'm just saying become aware that this is the crystallizing object, that aspiring object that we got. But in most ecosystems, including in the UK ecosystem, most entrepreneurs are no way going to do an IPO in the NASDAQ. This is bullshit. This is not, doesn't make any sense. Now let me put some vocabulary on it so we can manipulate the concepts. The concept here is that we say that there is heterogeneity in the entrepreneurship between two very different populations. One we should call opportunity entrepreneurs versus survival or necessity entrepreneurs. Survival and necessity entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs that are just trying to do entrepreneurship as a substitute to having employment because they just need to feed themselves. So they're going to start a food stand. They're going to do some little delivery business. They're not going IPO. Please give me a break. I mean, this is nonsense. You're confused if we start talking about that, which is interesting because the way you frame your question, and I'm not criticizing it, I'm just trying to deconstruct what's going on, okay? The way you frame the question is hinting that we need to defend entrepreneurship, and therefore it should be like the US, like, oh, whoa, wait. Most of you guys in England are not. Will never, and between you and me, it's the same in the US. It's the same in the US. Most people are not going to be Mark. This is a joke. This is a bad joke on the population. I am serious because I truly believe that one of the reasons why we have populism is because we've been trying to sell to the population that we should all be golden billionaires and that this is a normal aspiration. And if you don't do it, you are a loser that didn't try enough. I really believe that this message is wrong in all possible dimensions. A, statistically, will not occur. B, more importantly, given that it will not occur, it creates a huge frustration in the population that end up believing that Donald Trump told them, oh, you should become rich like me. Well, remember, you are already billionaire, darling. You are a Nepo baby. Okay? And you should become rich. And if you don't make it, you're a loser, and maybe the system rob you. Well, yeah, I think the system rob you because, quite frankly, it was never to happen, okay? We should discuss separately those two populations. And for those who mostly are going to have to manage a little like shop or pub or food stand, the question whether they can do fundraising or IPO is nonsense. And whether they can become billionaires is nonsense. And whether they can have tax break for the billionaires is nonsense because it doesn't touch them. It is not true that tax break change their life. They just need to survive. They're all trying to just survive, and they will not go IPO. So we have had, I think this is deep, and that's why I'm a bit engaged in that debate, is because probably that it has had consequence in political situation and instability in the way the population reacted around those problems. Now, to come back to your question a bit more narrowly, and that the World Bank discussed that properly, okay? For the one who got food stamp, you would want to be sure that the basic procedure and the simplicity is really, really tip-top, because for them, it's really difficult to deal with all that mess. If you only have a food stamp, having to deal with complex accounting rules, which can be the case because the country didn't go fast enough to reform them, is actually penalizing. For those who are going for opportunity, quite frankly, who cares? I mean, you're going to pay either accountant or lawyers, whether you are in French accounting or US accounting or US lawyers or French lawyers, deal with it, okay? Shut up. You're going for IPO. I'm not worried about you, okay? For the rest of the population, I think we should be a bit careful for them because sometimes the make sure that for that large population, which is a bit fragile, it's smooth. Yeah, I'm a bit worried. For the others, I'm not a bit worried. And for the others, quite frankly, I don't think it's that interesting to discuss. I'm not saying we should ignore them or I don't like them. I work in Silicon Valley. I'm training high-flying business school kids who are going to go for it. So it's also my job to take care of them. But politically, I think they are a marginal part. And another argument I want you to understand is that your question was very much around the US versus Europe, okay? The UK, France, Germany versus Europe. We got to have some realpolitik perspective on that question. Let me explain. In my first book, the one about France, I was explaining that one reason you could say that France is actually a paradise for entrepreneurship is because to be a paradise for entrepreneurship, you will want to be lucky that in your ecosystem, in the industry you want to work, that industry is rather strong, is rather big, is rather sophisticated, so that, it's easy because, well, there are a lot of people working there. You got employees, you got training schools, People understand your business. You got good customers that can ask you sophisticated products. So let me give you an example so you understand concretely what I'm talking about. In France, the food business, whether it's agri-food or restaurant, is a strong business. Okay, we got volume, we got reputation internationally. Therefore, if a kid starts doing food business in France, things are good. You got training schools. If you want to start a business, you can hire people because they are well trained. You got good regulation, so you know how to start your business. And also, you got very sophisticated customers. So, for instance, I know pretty well that space. Let's take restaurant. If you want to start anything interesting in Paris, we got one of the best population in terms of volume and spending capacity and sophistication about what could be happening in the market. We're going to be saying, oh, this is a new restaurant doing that. I'm interested, I'm going to come. So anything you want to try in Paris, you can do it. And everything converge so you can actually do it. In all interesting dimension, do I have employees? Can I get easily a store? Will I get enough sophisticated customers? And therefore, soon enough, you can have a new formula that the French press talks about. And in quite a snap, people are going to say, oh, why don't you start opening stores in Dubai or in Barcelona or in New York? So this is what I call a cluster, a worldwide level cluster, which is, it works. If you work in that ecosystem, boom, you can go in most places, including other top places in the world. So the good question for you as an entrepreneur is, am I lucky that in the activity I'm in, I am in such cluster? Okay. Now, if you look at France, we are lucky that we have such cluster in many industries. This is not the case for most countries in the world. France, for instance, let's take boring, energy sector. France is the only European country that has got electricity, big activity, including major players like EDF and Engie, nuclear, and oil. Therefore, the three major areas of energy sector. So it's a really solid energy sector. If you go to many other countries, including Europe, you will not have those three. The Brits, when they want to build their nuclear plants, they come to the French. Not all European countries have a strong oil and chemical industry. So that sector is very strong. We still have a very strong manufacturing sector, at least for Europe, because compared to Asia, that's a different business, okay? Asia is way better than us. Our IT sector, look at everything going on in AI in France, is extremely strong. Why? For a reason we know. It's because we are one of the greatest producer of weapons in the world, and that feeds IT strength. So we talked about food, IT, energy. What else we have? Luxury. Do I need to say something about the French luxury ecosystem? One of the best in the world. So why is France a paradise? It's because if a kid wants to start, well, they have a choice of many sectors that, wow, it's going to be pretty cool. And if I succeed, I can soon enough have an impact at a worldwide level. If you do that in 99% of the countries in the world, you're not in the same situation. There are only a few countries which match that level of opportunity, because here I'm talking about the positive aspect of entrepreneurship instead of saying there is no negative. There is no negative and there are positives. Okay. In the positives, I claim that there are only a few countries where you got such a choice of very strong ecosystem where you can have action and have impact and everyone understands you. Let me be clear about who are the others, and you can count them. The few other strong countries in Europe, nominally UK and Germany, which have also a lot of strong ecosystem. Asia, China for sure. And then there is the elephant in the room, which is the US. Okay, so the US is in a class of its own. The US is the only country that probably is ticking all the box all the time, including on natural resource, including having the largest land, including having unified language, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so good. Okay, point taken. The US is very advantageous in many of the aspects of entrepreneurship. But what is my message to people is that when you're lucky to be in UK or France, I wrote about France, I mean, please give me a break. Don't complain. Really, don't complain. Really, there are 170 countries in the world. I mean, you guys are lucky. I mean, there is a state of law, you got resources, you got employees, you got many sectors working, you can do business. The mafia are not threatening you day in and out, because in many countries, which I won't cite on the record, but you know who they are, they can be big, but really, I'm not sure you want to do business there, because it's really painful. Not to say there is no mafia in the UK or France, but nothing compared to, let's say it, nothing compared to maybe Sao Paulo, Moscow, or Jakarta, where the situation may be a bit more tricky. And I'm not even talking about African countries. And they're not the only one to have corruption issues and governmental issues, etc. Okay? So when you're lucky to be in France or the UK, you should really understand that you're so lucky. So when I was saying to people, France is a paradise, it was literal. This is not metaphoric.
I think being of Nigerian origin, you hear about people trying to start businesses and entrepreneurship in those contexts, and it's extremely difficult, as for the reasons you mentioned earlier. And there is this, culture of corruption. You could start a business and your workers will steal all your stock from you, or you could hire, I don't know, some contractors to build, and they might put dodgy materials which will corrode over time.
Well, you can try to do industry X, and there's no one to hire because unfortunately the ecosystem is poor. And I'm sorry for my voice. I've got a little condition. I hope it's not too bad for your podcast.
No.
You tell me if you want me to repeat something, and just do not hesitate.
Perfect, Fabrice. But yeah, but it's so. How do you galvanize people? How do you make them feel optimistic? Because you speak to entrepreneurs in this country, and they all they will tell you is how miserable it is, and how there's no chance to make it here. Like there's just such deep despondency.
And there's a new trend to go. Before it was America, now it's Dubai.
Yeah, and everyone's going to Dubai, the US. How do you change the narrative? How do you make entrepreneurs feel empowered?
Are you worried about, in particular, towards the guys, for instance, from those emerging markets, or are you talking about in the UK or France? Which one are you worried to galvanize?
I think more the UK, because as you said, you should stop complaining here. Things are great, but people just don't.
So let's talk about the UK one. But I mean, what I'm going to say would apply to everyone. But I think we need to train people, to get people to think about reality and morals. Reality is entrepreneurship is not meant to be easy. I think one of the big misunderstandings is that entrepreneurship will be or should be easy. I don't think this is realistic when you compare to the reality. I don't think this makes sense for morals. Why? Because guys, you guys want to become rich and not pay too much tax. Supposedly it's because it's difficult. I hope you understand that reasoning. So please get real. It's fucking difficult. So don't start saying, oh, I'm walking in the forest and there is a snake. I'm like, fuck. What is it they didn't teach you at school? This is fucking difficult. If they try to instill you the idea that it should be easy, get in the classroom at night between two classes, get a good beer, and find a stupid idea where you're going to do Airbnb of AI of dog food, like all your classmates, because everyone is doing Airbnb of there, or a day of dog food with AI for sure, because this is a fashion of the day. And then you spit out PowerPoints, and then some stupid angel give it to you so you can enjoy the life in a good incubator. I'm like, you're so disconnected from reality, darling. This is just not entrepreneurship. This is bourgeois kids being fed a fantasy that their social milieu can afford them to keep on floating on. I went to cool schools, then I go to cool firms, then I go to a cool incubator with cool co-founders and a cool angel. I'm like,
but do you feel now that AI is coming, it's like now, guys, this is going to be hard work. But the more AI grows, the more there's this idea that the future is going to be, the entrepreneur. You just have to think of the idea, and AI will just execute everything. You don't have to worry about problems. Well, how do you feel about that, and how do you approach that, with your students, I guess?
Typical, and that was a bit of what we are trying to advance. In my part, between the first book and the second book, I was trying to advance in the second book compared to the second to start to educate people to say, listen, you would not be good and you would not understand what's going on if you don't understand these are complex systems. And as complex systems, for instance, they have mechanisms like what we call evolution, adaptation. Therefore, let me be clear. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to believe that we are 7 billion on the planet. We got a few millions crypto bro that believe that by flying to Dubai, they can make money by throwing in the air a blockchain plus some PowerPoint AI. I mean, I don't believe, if you want my point of view, that money will start flowing on you because of that crap. Okay? If you want to make money, it will remain the fact that, listen, this is a complex economy. We got 7 billion humans. They are doing exchange. Where can you make money on those exchange? You have to be sure that you can go at scale because many ideas don't scale. Make sure that no one can imitate you easily. Is AI changing some stuff? Yes. A bit like when airplanes arrive. Okay, airplanes arrive. I can fly around. Yeah, sure, but now everyone's using airplane. So they still need to work hard. I mean, it's not because airplane arrive or the telephone arrive that, oh, now I can sleep. I can just do some Instagram from Dubai and I'm going to become rich. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, I've got AI. Where is margin coming? And what is margin coming from? I'm leaving aside the possibility that you will make money on a pyramid scheme. Okay, so, oops, I'm starting to discuss Bitcoin now. Let's leave it aside. This is the pyramid scheme. This is a different story. Yeah. It's you're robbing people from real money. If you really try to do a real business, you will still have to sell food. This is a proximity business. Sure, AI will help you the same way that the car help people to do a business like food. Okay, now I can truck my burgers to my store. We still have to do a store, and your store mostly it's your humans are going to break down. Okay, sure, maybe you have less humans because of AI. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see at which speed that will be true, and we'll see how much it will be to manage those cyber entities, which will supposedly talk to the human entities that supposedly is giving you revenues on which supposedly you're making margin. I believe entrepreneurship will remain difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that one of the big misunderstandings is really coming, again, I'm hinting at political aspect of the discussion, where for the last 50 years, we've been telling people, listen, you should be free, and if you work on your own, you'll become rich. I'm like, who can believe that crap? This is a wrong political message. It is creating a lot of dysfunctioning on the population that overall will not. And also, I want you to understand something which is, this is beyond politics, it's quasi-philosophy. But the population is making enough money to be able to fly, to have most of the population, not everyone, everywhere, but let's say Westerners. They can fly, they do have house, they do have heating. They have a level, bear with me, but this is important. They have a level of comfort which is above the level of comfort of a king in European medieval age. Let me repeat that sentence. a king like the King Louis XIV, Louis XIV, had a very bad health because there was no medicine at all, which we all have access to. The king could not travel by plane. The king, was not freezing because probably he could do a fire. I mean, but his life was quite frankly more uncomfortable than our life, including for people who are less lucky than I am, including for people who are upper, lower class of our Western countries. Okay, so what is going on? I want you to be aware of it, is that even if we increase the level of wealth, the absolute wealth, because most of the middle class can fly, most of the middle class has got heating, most of the middle class has drugs that the king didn't have, the problem is that everyone has got it. Therefore, we got a problem, is that what we have to understand is that we've been mixing people. You're going to become rich, and also we've been mixing the idea that you're rich above the others. And this is extremely difficult because we cannot be the 7 billion of us above the other 7 billion. This does not make any sense. So we are stressing the population by hinting, you, Alex, you, Dara, could be the next Trump. What do you understand by that? Oh, yeah, I can fly. Well, you can already fly, darling. B, oh, I'll be above Alex. You're not going to all of you become above the others at the same time, okay? This is a lie. This is not going to happen. So we have a bad programmation, okay? Programming of the population. What are we chasing? And it's interesting discussing entrepreneurship because implicitly in an entrepreneurship message, we are very close to those messages, which are quasi-philosophical about, oh, you should all become rich and famous. Guys, I mean, this needs to be thought. Do you seriously take that seriously? This doesn't make any sense.
But it feels like it's really applied to entrepreneurship. I feel, especially in the West, how we, with the society of capitalism, it puts entrepreneurs in this mindset of being, as you said, more or above than the other and having this money, a money-oriented trajectory. So what's your message to entrepreneurs today?
Yeah. So there's this dimension, is that entrepreneurship should be somewhat equivalent to that. And plus, everyone should be entrepreneur. Because we could have said, listen, entrepreneurship is like that, but only a few guys, Elon Musk, I don't know, Richard Branson, will be like that. But the rest of you, we're not going to stress you. Okay, listen, a few of you will be like that. The others, just do your normal stuff. Don't worry too much. So we got a double problem. We are telling entrepreneurs should be those superhumans that will have all this stuff supposedly that they need. And all of you should have it above the others. So we got a double whammy of mismessaging. So let me tell you what I think would make sense, because I'm still an entrepreneurship professor, so I'm not against entrepreneurship, okay? I think it's good to have people that explore new opportunities. So we need to change the way we produce. So it makes sense to have entrepreneurs. How many people needs to be entrepreneur? That's a bit more tricky question. Okay, so it's on the message about should it be everyone? Okay, be careful. Okay, don't rush on that conclusion. Second one, once people start doing things differently, they do new opportunities. They start using. In the past, it was to use a fire. Then it was to use steam. Then it was to use oil. Then it was to use telecom. Then now it's to use AI. Old stories. When you start doing that, you should be able to generate surplus margin, we could say. Question, should the system be built on the idea that once someone falls onto that opportunity, maybe because they were, but also maybe because they were lucky, should they become filthily rich? And because they are rich, now they can direct the world. Whoa. We should be careful on that second part of the reasoning. Because it's okay to explore, it's okay to maybe have some reward. I'm okay with it. Should it mean that those people should become the new kings and their politics should become everyone's politics because now they're the rich of the AI, like we are the rich of the oil? I am a bit more worried about it. It doesn't mean I don't like entrepreneurs, but my point of view is that maybe entrepreneurs are good at doing that. Does it mean that they understand better politics? Let me doubt it. if I may. Therefore, I believe we need to support entrepreneurship mindset. We need to have entrepreneurs. We need to train them. They need to keep on exploring and having renewal of the economic ecosystem and growth, and more growth for everyone, including some inequalities. That's always occur probably in human societies. What I'm a bit worried is some naivety, which sometimes could be sending us to societal catastrophes when we try to equate entrepreneurship to everyone should and could become like this billionaire, and this billionaire could direct us. I think this is a sum of nonsense that I really am against. But it's not contradictory with, nevertheless, entrepreneurs are very respectable and we need them and we need to help them. But to be very concrete, because, okay, this was a bit philosophical, I think we need some level of entrepreneurship in the country. Do we need to go to what the US, for instance, because they were very like that, and maybe a bit in UK, especially with Thatcherism, etc., like having like a bashing all the time, saying only entrepreneurs, and the entrepreneurs are king, and they should be king, and they should be protected, and everyone should be entrepreneur. If you're not entrepreneur, you're going to be dipshit, because soon nothing else will make any sense. And you know what? So social system will soon be dead. Social protection, you forget about it. If you're not with your own reach, you will not be protected. Retirement will disappear. I don't agree with that. Mm-hmm. I really think that unrealistically or dangerously stress the majority of the population that with a message which I don't think makes sense. I'm sorry that we end up discussing politics, but it was also interesting to understand why some message in entrepreneurship sometimes are corrupted because they are very linked to some political views.
So, studying development economics, there was this debate about unlocking the entrepreneurial skills of the entrepreneur in Dakar or Lagos or Accra, because as you said, that is, the average entrepreneur. And the argument within development economics is that they've actually been stifled by the government and so on and so forth, and that the key to development is unlocking the potential of these entrepreneurs. But to me, that seems quite unrealistic. It seems quite fanciful, because it's like the conditions are just so bad. It's really hard to make it. And I know you said not everyone can be an Elon Musk or a Zuckerberg, but it feels like they can't even get beyond a level which is just subsistence living. They can't get beyond a level where they can actually garner any sort of like wealth or just very moderate success. So what do you think about the global South context? Like, what is the message there? Or do you think we need to address the structural issues before we can have a message to those entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I can sense you have a good understanding of the issue, but nevertheless, I'll be careful of some of the qualification of the problem when we say that often it's the government. In the global South, it's a bit more complex, because often we are trying to have very fast a market economy. And when we try to do that very fast, you can have a lot of illness, disease of those system. The government in the classical Western politics, I don't think it's the main problem, okay? In most of the economies, you have captured by a few actors, okay? Mafia or quasi-mafia, which are state mafia, king or dictator. And so what people have been doing, in my understanding, because, I'm a reader of the World Bank papers, when they intervene in those countries, is try to collectively get the system to function properly. You do want to have social intervention because social intervention are necessary to give some basic ground. Like, for instance, training is really necessary to be able to do business. I mean, if we assume we're going to do real business, because if the goal is only to extract the oil and put the money in Switzerland, you don't need to train your population. But let's assume you really want to work on the country. You need to train. These are mostly the history of the last 200 years are that mostly it's state organized. I'm not saying state is always paying, but you got some social organization. Let me give you an example in the French system, which is often qualified as a quasi-socialist country. Not only the state was very present in training, but also you had quasi-state actors, like for instance, ESSEC or the business schools in France are not state, but they are driven by the Chamber of Commerce. So it was a collectivism of all the economic actors that would pool the money, so it's a taxation, but not go this way, so that we have strong training system, so we can have a lot of workers. So I think those countries need, through various possible ways, depending on their history or culture, to be able to have those slow layering. Do we have good training? Do we have health? Because if we don't have health, we can't have workers. Do we have dwelling? Because people cannot come to the work in your location and therefore have a normal living system, which is dwelling, healthcare, education, childcare, retirement. Because if people know, typically we have had that in France and probably it's a problem in the 19th century and it's going on in Africa. If you tell people to come out of their agriculture life, to come in the city, but in the city there is no social support to raise kids because people have to go to a factory, or no social support for retirement because we don't live in a village anymore. Therefore, when you're old, you are alone because this is a big town. Then the society suffers a lot. It's a mess. So we need, for a good economic system, usually you need a strong social layering. My perception is that many in the South country failed on that. And if I may, very cautiously, because I'm not an academic expert, but since I spent 10 years when I was a kid in Africa, I'm a bit sensitive in Cameroon to what's going on there. I sense that often that layering didn't work, and mostly it's because often the group in power was a bit too much accumulating the wealth for themselves and not having a good social system. If I may, to your question, and you'll see it will be interesting when you revisit it on the video, immediately going against the state, I would be more careful. Let me give you an example of development, because your question was pointed on development. One of the few cases where we had amazing economic development was very state-driven. I mean, what was going on in Singapore or China was extremely state-driven. Not to say there was no market dynamic. There was the market dynamic. But let's not underestimate the state-driven dimension of those good ecosystems. Therefore, what I would wish, which quite frankly is the balance, which is extremely difficult, because when then we talk about China and Singapore, having those strong state system of a different obedience, quite frankly, between Singapore and China, it's not exactly the same system politically, but nevertheless still a strong state, then it could edge towards dictatorship somewhat. Let's be polite in qualifying some of the success. So it's not easy to say, I'm going to find you a good example that works, because I know in many African countries, they didn't do their work properly. They're mostly not that successful. A few are a bit more interesting than others. I would kind of randomly put, for instance, Morocco is interesting, even though you still have a king system, which we could debate. But nevertheless, it's a pretty interesting system. I mean, at the scale of Africa, it's an interesting one, but it's still a bit cautious because it's a bit of a dictatorship somewhat. China and Singapore are a bit tricky, and all the other countries were, quite frankly, they did miserable. And it was not a socialist country that did miserable. It was the junta that is just appropriating the money. Mm. Therefore, yeah, we need more entrepreneurship, but the reality is we somewhat need more subtle institutions that often needs at least to put in place good social systems. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you can't do business.
And that's one thing you point out. In the UK and France, there are these amazing institutions. And maybe I wanted to...
Did you want to... So I wanted to ask you just one more question. It was about the relationship between like culture and entrepreneurship. And sorry to go back to this dichotomy between the UK and the US, but another reason as to why some people say the US is more successful is because literally they are entrepreneurs, they are go-getters, whereas Brits, we're a bit more, I don't know how to describe it, but perhaps we're just less like an entrepreneur. The way we're a bit more more averse to risk. We, a bit more. We don't have as much zest and zeal as the Americans, let's say. And so I just wanted to hear your thoughts on perhaps cultural aspects to entrepreneurship. Do you think there is a link?
Well, first you have to understand that it's really refreshing for me to hear it with the Brits. Why? Because usually the way people frame it is to say, you know what, the French, our culture, they're very bad compared to the Brits.
Oh, wow.
No, I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. This is serious. Okay. What I'm hinting at is that first people tend to, self first. Second, in absolute term, or do we really believe that the Brits are like this? I think it's tricky. It's just Mickey. And probably we don't have time. And again, when I'm teaching those stuff, we end up on a good class. I tend to teach on a 25-hour section. So we discuss that many, many hours. I'm already impressed that your podcast would allow very good space as we are doing now. But let me just give you one idea, okay? Because we can't do the long version. We are not sure as scientists that actually entrepreneurs need to be risk taker. Let me unpack that argument, okay? Because it's counterintuitive. Okay, this is the argument. You probably heard about that sentence in entrepreneurship. It says that you need to privatize the gains and make public the loss. Did you hear that expression ever, or it doesn't ring a bell?
Yes.
Let me explain what it says. It says that in many deals, what you would want is to structure the deal so that whatever can go wrong if someone else pays, but whatever can go good, I get the benefit. Okay, let me unpack that. Okay, first, let me be clear that this is very practical. I'm not saying it's moral, okay? But it's very practical. For instance, let me give you a typical example in the French ecosystem. There is a firm that is going down, and it goes to bankruptcy court. In bankruptcy court, a judge will have to decide what to do with the firm. And they may want to get the firm to survive for employment purposes. That's what they have to take into account. And they may say, listen, we want the firm to survive. We'll give it to someone for a sum X. And maybe we'll tell the shareholder, sorry, darling, but your shares are now worth zero in the bankruptcy court. I can do anything I want, okay? Good. So an entrepreneur come on that court and say, I want the firm. And they say, I want to pay the firm 10 million. But, and this is a big but, I will pay 10 million in 10 years. What's the trick? The trick is simple. What is actually that entrepreneur is saying, listen, later when I'm very rich, I will claim that I paid 10 million, therefore I took a risk. The reality is that if the bankruptcy court judge accept that deal, and that the deal is properly structured for the entrepreneur, you're going to put the debt on the firm. So you take the firm, you put 10 million of debt on it with the agreement of the bankruptcy court. You run the firm. Now let's see, two branch. You become rich, you pay back the 10 million, and you're rich. And then you complain about tax because you're supposed to complain about tax. Second branch, you go bankrupt again. Who pays the 10 million? Not the entrepreneur. Why? Because it's on the firm. That was the deal. So, who takes the risk? The collectivity. Who makes the money?
The entrepreneur.
The entrepreneur. Now, I'm not saying this is moral. Okay? And indeed, I'm a bit ill at ease because I have to teach my student that structure because it's very often done. But I want to remember something, that to do that deal, what do you need to do? You need to be extremely risk averse. You need to be good to unload the fucking risk. Therefore, going back to my point, Do we want entrepreneurs who are brainless and take risks? No way. Only the public that got the PR of the rich person saying, ooh, I don't want to pay tax because I took risk. Believe that crap.
Fabrice, maybe we can end on this. I wanted to ask you one last question. We could call it young entrepreneurs. Now we're in the media space. Maybe not specifics, but do you have any advice for us going into this maybe not so risk averse world?
Overall, I would recommend that you try to do something that you like, not for moral reason, but mostly because only on bounding into an industry that you believe and you start learning and knowing, you are going to be in a position at some point to capture real opportunities. Most of the time, the real opportunities are not available at the beginning. This is not true. It's a bit like in your romantic life. You don't find your perfect partner when you're 14 and you're going to a movie with a lady on the first night. No way. You're going to find a more interesting partner when you're 30 and you've been dating a lot of people and now your life is well settled. And when you see a good match, you know what you're doing. So the idea that you, a beginner, can go and disrupt an industry is naive. Therefore, I recommend you choose an industry you like because you're going to have to swallow it for a long time. You're going to have to be in the industry for 3, 4, 5 years. You may want to work into the dirty part of the industry. Let me give you an example. Most people want to go in the industry to the sexy part. Oh, I'm going to do marketing. I'm going to do press release and drinking champagne when we launch the product. Okay, that's sexy. But in many industries, working in purchasing department is the best, which is not the sexy part. This is usually a job that we give to 30, 40-year-old people that are not so much, and we say, oh, you should go to purchasing. Like, oh, I'm going to purchasing. Yes, but in purchasing, you learn what are your suppliers. They are selling you for billions. You got the real margin here on the table. You know who can produce. Where is actually the trends? What are the technologies? How would you check the technology? I mean, this is fucking boring. It's much more boring than saying, oh, we're going to do Airbnb on dog food. Much more boring. But we're talking about real money. You know that in this industry, this is a difficult part, and those guys know how to do it. Therefore, choose an industry that you feel like you could have an impact. Be realistic about what we call effectuation. So I send you back, but basically it says, who are you? What do you know? What can you do with your friends? If you know your industry and you've been there for 15 years, when you start saying, there's a guy here, he's the only supplier, he deserves to have a competitor. And also because my friend told me that we can produce better. I'm like, tell me, friend, you think we can do better than that guy? Yes. No, and we could sell it to our firm. If we start off in a firm, we can do better than that guy. Okay, now this is serious. This is becoming interesting. Because I've been in the industry for 15 years. I know what we're talking about. I know how to identify a guy who's doing a lot of margin. I know how to identify an engineer in my firm that tells me we could do it easily. And I know my firm that is buying billions in that range. And I can tell them, listen, if we start a firm like that, do you give us a first contract? Yes, no. If you say no, we don't start. If you say yes, we got a contract. This is much better than we got a PowerPoint in an incubator. Therefore, my main message is be careful with incubator, PowerPoint, business plan competition, circus.
At the end of the day, you have to go for
it. And if I may, you might want to go for it smarter and more long-term.
Yes.
So, for instance, I want to go in that industry. I would say, okay, you know what? Be not risk taker. Get a job. Why? Like, okay, this is not brilliant. I'm like, this is brilliant. When you get a job in the industry, someone is paying you to get trained. only morons believe you need to take risk. They pay you to train you. Do it. And do it in a smart way. I would like to be in that space. Where could I work that I'm going to start knowing the people, knowing the engineers, knowing the doers, or maybe knowing the market, and being paid for that. So when you were saying a few seconds ago, go for it, you were, if I may, because I'm trying to help you, you're going for the naive version again. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to help you and your listener. Don't romanticize the stuff, thinking, yeah, we need to be. No. Don't start now. Don't start now. Be much more realistic. Not saying I'm afraid. No. Say, I want to be in that space. I want to understand it. I'm ambitious. If someone is going to pay me to understand, and I'm observing the industry, I want to make money seriously at some point. And this is okay for me. It's okay to make money because you know, and you'll be able to find a space where there is market and efficiency. And I would hope, if I may, that would be my conclusion, that will occur and that will make money and that you will recognize that the reason why this occurs is not only you were trained, but also trained by state, trained by society. You could use employees which were there, you could use infrastructure, and you would pay your tax, whether they're 10, 20, 30, 40, 50%, I don't give a damn. Pay your tax, be rich, and everyone will be happy.
Sounds like a Fabrice, thank you so much for making the time for us.
Thank you. An absolute pleasure, Fabrice. Thank you.
I'll be happy to talk again. Good luck, and thank you for you guys to have this conversation with a lot of people.
Thank you very much, and who knows, we might do it again.
But another follow-up if you got more questions.
Thank you, Fabrice. I'll talk to you soon. All right, bye.
Talk to you soon.